I got a question on Patreon about cartridge comparisons, and two that I don't think would make a good episode on their own, but I think they're worth talking about in a little bit of depth for people that maybe don't know some of the differences and the nuances. Very, very different, almost on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. One was about 22 long rifle subsonics versus 22 shorts, and or the other comparison was going to be 454 Casull versus 460 Smith & Wesson. Okay, so let's get started with the smaller ones. Okay, 22 long rifle subsonic. Because subsonic, the speed of sound, I know it's not exactly right. It's a little bit more, and it depends on humidity and altitude and all this other stuff. But in general, right around 1,000 feet a second for rough numbers. You start getting much faster than 1,000 feet a second. Maybe it's 1050, maybe it's 1,100, but even numbers, 1,000 feet a second, you start to break that transonic barrier and you make that crack. So even if your rifle is suppressed, you're still going to be loud. So subsonic. 22 long rifle. The general way to do this is just have regular weight bullets that are down around 1,000 feet a second. Generally, it'll be heavier 4 caliber normal, like 40 grains, 45 grains at 1,000 feet a second. And then your other end of the spectrum is 22 shorts. Now, 22 shorts, as the name might imply, are quite a bit shorter than 22 long rifle. Generally, they're going to have a much lighter bullet weight. So they're probably not going to be subsonic unless they specifically say subsonic. So if you're trying to suppress them, they're probably going to be louder. Now, you may not care about this. When would you be comparing these two? Probably for pest control. And I think the person that asked this question asked it specifically for urban pest control. Okay, so what kind of pests are we talking? Right? 22 shorts are going to shine when it's really tiny critters or really close and you can get precise shots and it doesn't really matter. Mice, rats, things like that. Even up to small ground squirrels. They're fine. 22 shorts are fine. Now, 22 long rifle subsonic is probably going to be your better bet for, it's going to have more punch. It's going to have more let's say, knockdown power, right, I guess is the overused term. But, right, if you're going to be shooting foxes or big rodents like, rock chucks or marmots or woodchucks, depending on your place in the country, bigger rodents, things like that, certainly something like a raccoon or a possum, you're going to want to move up. Not that you can't. I've shot raccoon with 22 short, I believe, or maybe even colibris, I forget. It didn't do well. It still killed the raccoon, I'm sure, but it didn't run a ways. So you're going to get a much bigger payload with the 22 subsonics, long rifle subsonic. So if you're trying to be quiet and you want some more payload down range, get the 22 long rifle subsonics. If you don't care about the quiet and you're not shooting suppressed, just get regular 22 long rifle. They're the cheapest. They're the most available. So there's that. The 22 shorts, if you want less power. Why might you want less power? Well, you're shooting around tractors or farm equipment or in barns or, things like that. Things with infrastructure where you don't want more power, right? That's kind of why the 22 short is a thing you don't want more power. Again, generally going to be a lighter bullet and less powder. So there's that. That's the big comparison there. So what are you trying to do? Also, make sure your gun will feed 22 shorts. There are some older guns that were only made for 22 shorts. Even some like defensive handguns, if you can believe that, like only in 22 short. But most things today are going to be 22 long rifle. You may find if it's like a lever action or bolt action, it may feed 22 shorts, longs, or long rifles. But most of your semi-autos and stuff are not going to feed those. So just be aware of that. That's another thing to consider. And bullet type, depending on what you're shooting, right? If you're shooting something really small, it probably doesn't matter. If you're going to be shooting anything with substantial size with a 22 short, you probably want to go with the solid because you want the penetration because it's going to be a lightweight round anyway, and it's going to be, a lot less power than a 22 long rifle. If you're shooting a 22 long rifle, you may vacillate between I want solids or I want hollow points, right? I love CCI Mini Mags, 22 long rifle. CCI Mini Mags, and I go back and forth depending on what I'm doing. Do I want I think it's 36 or 38 grain hollow points, or do I want the 40 grain solids? It really depends on what I'm doing. So you may decide with subsonics, you're running the Gemtex, you're running the CCI subsonics, or Remington subsonics, whatever it is, you may decide you want a specific bullet profile or hollow point or non-hollow point for your pest control. Right? Are you shooting prairie dogs or are you shooting raccoons? Those are two very different things, much different sizes. So depending on what you want to do will depend on what ammunition you're going to choose. Now let's go to the complete other end of the spectrum, right? Let's talk about the 454 Casull and the 460 Smith & Wesson. Okay, so much like they did with the 38 Special and the 357 Magnum, they just made the case a little bit longer and loaded it to higher pressure. Just like they did with the 44 Special and the 44 Magnum, they made the case a little bit longer and loaded it to higher pressure. Not because they needed more room in the case so that somebody wouldn't put a 357 Magnum in an older gun and blow it up. Or same with the 44, right? The 45 Colt is originally chambered for the old Colt. What is it, 1873 single action Army? I'm not an old school gun guy, so I think that's correct. So that was the original chambering for that. Well, that, it's not the strongest of guns. I know, a lot of Wyatt Earp fans out there are going to say it's the best gun ever. I don't even know if that's the gun he used. There's some debate about that. He might have used the Smith & Wesson. But be that as it may, those older guns cannot handle much higher pressures. But modern guns can. So you can super hot load a 45 Colt, and it's plenty potent enough for most things. But so that people didn't blow up their older guns, there's a 45 long Colt plus P or 45 Colt plus P. I know 45 long Colt's not the proper name, but that's what a lot of people call it. So they lengthened it and made it the 454 Casull. Think of it like the 45 Colt Magnum. And then to make it even more powerful, they made it in a 460 Smith & Wesson, which is even longer than the 454 Casull. Now, the issue that I would just tell you, I prefer the 454 Casull. I own a 454 Casull. The reason I prefer this is you can get it in what I would call a very large but still shootable as a handgun platform, like a Ruger Super Red Hawk. Ruger Super Red Hawk is a big gun, but it's big in like a large frame revolver kind of way. A Super Red Hawk is a carryable, on the hip, shootable size handgun. The only, and there's probably others, right? But the only guns I'm aware of that come in 460 Smith & Wesson are the Smith & Wesson X frames. If you've ever had the displeasure of handling one of these, it's like a crew-served handgun. It's a handgun in name only, right? I know that you can, but you're probably not carrying these or shooting these like a handgun. You're probably shooting them off a rest or off a bipod, which I handgun hunt for the challenge. I don't even like to shoot my rifles off a rest unless I'm sighting them in or doing range work. I like to shoot standing, sitting, kneeling, prone. So if I'm handgun hunting, what am I doing with a handgun that's so big I need to put a bipod on it? Or I need to shoot it off a rest? I don't like to hunt that way with a rifle. So what am I doing hunting that way with a handgun? I like to shoot a handgun like it's a handgun. I like to carry a handgun like it's a handgun. So to me, the 460 Smith & Wesson, the guns are just way too big. They're much larger in frame size than a 454 Casull. And here's the thing. I feel kind of like the 460 Smith & Wesson. It is, to me, kind of like the 300 Win Mag. I don't like it because it's more than you need. I can kill anything in North America with a 30-06. I can. You could argue with that if you want, but it's true because they all have been. And that was with a lot less, we have much better bullets today than they had when most of those game animals were taken. So you can kill everything with a 30-06. So why am I going to go with the extra recoil, the extra power and everything of a of a 460 Smith & Wesson or a 300 Win Mag. I just don't need it. And in the case of the 460, not only are you getting more recoil, you're getting a much bigger gun. So I don't see the point of it unless you just want it. If you just want the most powerful handgun, then go for it. But don't think that you need it for anything. And I think you give up a lot more than you gain because it's a much, much bigger handgun. Is it more powerful? Yeah. Is the 454 Casull more power than you need? Yes, it absolutely is. I hand load my 454 Casulls. I've shot some pretty hot loads in it, but I like to shoot a lot. And I generally load them down to what I think can handle anything that I'm going to hunt, which includes elk and bear and things like that, to a manageable level, which is somewhere a little bit hotter than a 45 Colt plus P and a little bit lower than a full power 454 Casull because I don't need all that power. So to me, I like the 454 Casull. And honestly, the more practical of the ones, if you're not going to reload, is 44 Magnum. I like the 454 Casull because there's a lot of flexibility. There's a whole lot of 45 caliber .452 diameter projectiles out there. So I think it's a more flexible cartridge if you reload, and it doesn't really cost you much more if you reload. But if you don't reload, 44 Magnum is really the most common sense one. So if you don't reload, I'd go with 44 Magnum. Again, there's nothing, going back to the power, there's nothing in North America that you're not going to handle with a 44 Magnum with a proper bullet. So if you don't reload, that's probably the one. On that, I do wish that they had made or did make more rifles in those calibers. I think there's one lever action made by Rossi or somebody, Chiappa maybe. Somebody makes a 454 Casull lever action. But there's only one or two. It'd be cool if there were more guns. It'd be cool like how Ruger makes, the 77 44 Mag, a bolt action 44 Magnum. It'd be cool if somebody made a bolt action 454 Casull or a bolt action 460 Smith & Wesson or a bolt action 500 Smith & Wesson. I can't believe that. I can believe it because they did it, but it seems odd to me that Smith & Wesson came out with a lever gun and they came out with it in 44 Remington Magnum. When a bunch of people make lever action 44 Magnums, why didn't Smith & Wesson come out with a lever action in 500 Smith & Wesson and 460 Smith & Wesson? That just seems like that would be awesome. Why did they not do that? It's a rimmed cartridge. It would work great in a lever gun with a tube magazine. Just kind of I know I'm off on a tangent, but just why did they not do that from jump? You could easily come out with that and then chamber it down to the 44 Magnum. It would have no problems. So it seems odd that they didn't do that, being as the market is flooded with a ton of lever action guns, and Smith & Wesson has a golden opportunity there in my opinion to make something in one of their own proprietary cartridges that is got their name on it that's really unique on the market. But instead they come out with another hashtag Me Too lever action 44. It is what it is. It's probably a good gun. I hope they do well. I like Smith & Wesson, but it just seems kind of odd to me. Anyway, those are my thoughts on some of those caliber comparisons and some random tangents I went off on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Your tactical verse of the day: you shall do no injustice in judgment in measurements of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. So my thoughts on that: you should be honest in our dealing. We should be honest in our dealings, whether it comes to money we owe people or dealing fairly when we're doing a business transaction or whatever that is, right? We're supposed to deal fairly, equal weights and equal measures. On, probably much less important gun note, I know we all have our favorite cartridges and our favorite calibers, and we all have our own opinions, but let's not lie. Let's not, lie that, make up stuff of why our cartridge is the best and why our, 22 long rifle is the best deer caliber ever or whatever it is, right? Let's not go to the ridiculous and just be dishonest. Let's try and be fair. So with that, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.